Now, the other day, on May the 4th to be exact, we got another Disney Gallery special for the Book of Boba Fett, just like we did for the first 2 seasons of The Mandalorian. And what they are, if you don't know, are just these peeks behind the scenes that feature some interviews with the actors and creators about how the show came together, the challenges, the thought processes, and so on. They're basically a making of that so far has been pretty interesting and certainly worth the watch. That said, there were a couple things in particular from this latest Disney Gallery that sort of stood out and that I guess I'd like to talk about and discuss, even though, yeah, there are a whole lot of things we could probably really get into and talk about just in general. But anyway, the first one was something said right at the beginning by Jon Favreau.
Our responsibility is to be respectful to all of Star Wars, and that means the films I grew up with, to some extent, the expanded universe, as well as everything that's been established as canon. So every time we discuss a storyline or a character, we look at it from the perspective, it's almost like you hold it up and look at it through each facet and see what the implications might be.
Okay, so first of all, it is interesting to note that Favreau does bring up the expanded universe here, even though he said they only look at it in some extent instead of large extent, which I think some fans wish was the case, that they would look much more often or more closely at it and draw more from it, or that it had never been pushed aside in favor of creating a new canon in the first place. But at the very least, he does acknowledge its existence and that they do look to it. It's not like when Kathleen Kennedy said, when talking about how they go about making the new films, that, and I quote, "There's no source material, we don't have comic books, we don't have 800-page novels, we don't have anything other than passionate storytellers who get together and talk about what the next iteration might be. We go through a really normal development process that everybody else does." And hearing about her saying all that just might have been my most frustrating moment as a Star Wars fan. I mean, to hear the president of Lucasfilm, of all people, either somehow not know that they did have all that material, unless I was imagining reading it for decades, or that she just flat out pretended the expanded universe didn't exist to garner, I don't know, pity points about how hard it is to make the films, is again quite frustrating to say the least. Though also what she said there at the end, that they go through a normal development process, was also quite curious, because as Favreau kind of says or alludes to in that clip, making Star Wars is not a normal experience. There is so much to think about and consider when you add to the lore or add to all that has come before. You have to, or should, analyze the impact of nearly every decision you make on everything else there already is. You're not making these films or shows in isolation. You're essentially building to or adding to a universe, and what you do here will impact what happens before and what happens after.
What happens to one of you will affect the other. You must understand this.
And Dave Filoni even talks a few times about this in the show, about how all of Star Wars is connected, that it's one big story that they're creating.
Again, that's what fans want. They want one connected universe.
He gets that you have to respect what's been established, or you end up disrespecting the fans and all their years of dedication to the franchise. And yes, I know many fans will bring up changes the Clone Wars made to existing canon at the time by him and by Lucas, or that, yeah, he has, speaking of Filoni, he has ignored or overwritten aspects of the new canon already, like changing the story of what happened to Kanan during Order 66. There are also other things he's added to the canon that are questionable. In other words, I'm not saying he and Favreau are perfect. I'd even argue the Book of Boba Fett was just an okay series overall. There were certainly things or aspects of it that I really enjoyed and thought were really good, and then there were other aspects of it that I didn't like as much or that weren't so great, perhaps. And you are, of course, free to completely disagree with me. You're free to have loved everything about it, or free to think it was an abomination if you want to. Or maybe, like me, you also found yourself somewhere in the middle on it. You neither loved nor hated it, which can happen even though it seems like nowadays Nuance is pretty much dead and everything has to be all or nothing. You're either on one side or the other, and there's no room for any sort of middle ground. I mean, all I know is when I didn't praise everything about the Book of Boba Fett, I had some people calling me a hater, even though during that exact same time I had a lot of people calling me a Disney shill, asking how much I was getting paid by them because I had some good things to say about the High Republic era. Somehow I have to be one or the other, or both, apparently, however that works. I can't be someone who formulates different opinions about different parts of Star Wars. I can't be someone who will call it as I see it for each movie, show, book, or whatever it might be. I have to love or hate all of it. But anyway, getting back on point here, when I hear someone like Jon Favreau or Dave Filoni talk about respecting Star Wars and how important it is to them or how important it is to get it right, I do believe them. I do get the sense of passion and appreciation for the franchise from them, which is why when they do perhaps create something that I personally didn't think was amazing, like the Book of Boba Fett, I'm far more forgiving, because at the very least the intent was there to make something that honors the franchise. And yes, I know all the sayings that the best of intentions don't always lead to the best of results, or that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And so sure, well-intended or not, if they kept delivering duds, which isn't to say that I think the Book of Boba Fett is an absolute dud, I'm not going to be happy. I'm sure I'd call them out for it, and that I'd want them to be removed for whatever that's worth. But right now, I fully believe they are the best hope for the future of Star Wars, especially at a time when Disney has become embroiled in controversies that might be turning some fans, or a lot of fans, away. I think Favreau and Filoni should be calling basically all the shots at this point, because they do put Star Wars itself and the fans first. They think of it first. They are the type of creators who seem to ask, what can we do for the fans and for the franchise, rather than what can these fans and this franchise do for us? How can we use it for whatever we want to use it for? Which actually kind of brings us to the next clip I want to share from that Disney Gallery episode of The Book of Boba Fett, and this time it is one from Dave Filoni.
I've always felt with Luke that he is a step more on kind of the Qui-Gon Jinn path, even though he didn't really know Qui-Gon. But if you go, Qui-Gon taught Obi-Wan, Obi-Wan taught Luke, you can get that kind of methodology there.
Okay, so first of all here, what do I think Filoni's talking about when he says the Qui-Gon Jinn path? Well, I think he means Luke is more a step in the direction of someone who believes in trusting his own feelings and instincts, letting the Force and its will guide him, over strictly adhering to the rules of the Jedi Order and letting that dictate his actions, or what should or shouldn't be done. He's basically doing what he feels is right for the greater good over following a strict set of rules. And we can certainly argue that's where the Jedi of the prequel era went wrong, and why Qui-Gon was often at odds with them. Not because Qui-Gon was rebellious for the sake of being rebellious, or some sort of rule breaker just to be a rule breaker, or a gray Jedi, but because he was just a Jedi. He was just a servant of the Force, no more, no less. He wasn't about to let a rule of the Jedi Code stand in his way if it meant not doing what he thought was right, or what the Force wanted or willed him to do. For example, he was going to train Anakin despite the code forbidding it, because his feelings, or the Force, were telling him that's what he was supposed to do, that he found Anakin for a reason, whereas the Council wouldn't allow it simply because it was against the rules, and what the Force wanted, well, be damned what the Force wanted. They were also, you could say, talking about the Jedi Council here, following the will of the Republic more so than anything else. They had lost sight of their true purpose, which is to just follow the Force and seek or bring about balance in the galaxy. And so to maybe hopefully tie this all together a bit, I really hope and think that Filoni and Favreau are a step down the Qui-Gon Jinn path as well. That's the impression watching this show gives me, and the impression I always get from these two guys in general when they talk about Star Wars, that they trust themselves and the will of Star Wars, or what's best for it, over the will of the Disney Council. That despite what anyone else above them may want Star Wars to be or used for, they are always trying and fighting to do what they feel is right for Star Wars itself and its fans, which isn't to say these two things or these two goals are always mutually exclusive. Certainly Star Wars can broaden its horizons in ways to be more inviting to more people, but it has to remain true to itself first and foremost, otherwise it is no longer Star Wars. And so I feel these two, Filoni and Favreau, are always trying to make it the best it can be, though yes, they may fail sometimes. And they're always asking how what they're doing will affect the lore and greater story first, more so than just approaching it like they would any other story, as Kennedy once said. Oh, and before wrapping this up, I know there are some that might say or ask, if Luke was truly going down the Qui-Gon Jinn path, why was he following the rules of the Order or Code and making Grogu pick between becoming a Jedi or going back to Din Djarin? And Filoni in this show basically answers that question when he talks about how Luke, better than anyone, understands how hard the choice is to be a Jedi, but he does want to give Grogu a choice. Being a Jedi is a hard life. Qui-Gon said that himself, and it will require sacrifice, absolutely. It does require you to put the well-being of others above your own or above those you care personally about. As I've said before, the question Luke was essentially asking Grogu was, when push comes to shove, can you make the hard choice? Are you willing to give up what you want and love right now so that others don't have to have these things taken away from them later? And if Grogu couldn't make that choice or didn't want to, then Luke wanted to know that now before he trained him to avoid any dangerous conflicts of interest down the road. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you thought of the Disney Gallery, The Book of Boba Fett, assuming you watched it. And if you think Favreau and Filoni should be the future of Star Wars, should they be the one guiding this franchise? Whatever you think, either way, leave your comments below. Let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.